So, Kat, I wanted to talk about the lowest drawer. Could you tell us, like, what was the inspiration for this work?
Well, since I've been working a lot with lower frequency ideas, like with Abasada, and I did my PhD in that area, and I was really struggling to kind of combine that research in my acoustic composition. And I guess one of the ways I've been trying to do it was conceptually. So rather than making pieces that were very low, I would actually make pieces where there was some reference to descending in pitch, or what happens when low pitches group together.
So, can you talk a bit about the aesthetic of your scores? Like, they're very recognizable, and it's very beautiful looking kinds of shapes, or I don't know what the right word is. It's like almost like calligraphy that you've ended up using. So where did that start?
Well, I'd been drawing sound for a very long time, like drawing, I'd call them like sound pictures or something, but I never thought that, there were sort of sounds that I kind of would arrange in my head, and I had all these kind of concepts about how long they went for, in relation to how big they were in my notebook. And then when, I think I've told this story a few times, but when Decibel started, and I actually tried to make one of these pieces into a piece, and the conversations we had about the score player really liberated that idea of these pictures becoming scores, and then moving from the drawings to the computer. It enabled the pieces, but it also stylised them in a certain way. Yeah. So, the choices of colour I make, the width of the lines, and all these things are changing slightly as I go along, and certain things work better than others. But I guess when I make the pieces, I spend a lot of time, I kind of make them on the computer, then I print them out and look at them in what they actually physically look like, and that's why I've started making scores. Even though you can only read them on the electronics, I've been making scores just so that you can actually see, you can study them and understand what happens in them, and that's part of the process of making them. But I don't think I deliberately make any aesthetic decisions on their beauty or otherwise while I'm making them, although I'm never really sure, but I don't deliberately do that.
And it's just a kind of free process in terms of like when things will, glissando up or down?
No, I think it's very much like any composer process. You come up with ideas about explorations, maybe. So what happens if they're both, one's going up and one goes out at the same time, or if they're slightly out, or if that one's steady in that mood. Just these kind of structural decisions. I guess what's different about my music from a lot of others is that I'm not that interested in the pitch choices that people make, but I'm really fascinated with the proportions of those things. So once people make choices, what happens after that? And that the challenge for performers with my pieces is staying true to your original decision and making free decisions every time you start a piece. I think it's tempting to work out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But I think it takes a lot of the characteristic out of the music to do that.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting situation for the chord. The chord at the end might be completely different from one performance to another.
Yeah, well, that's what I hope happens.
Yeah.
So, maybe if you catalogued all the performances, you'd have all these different kind of sound mass groups that we could use for something else. I don't know.
Now, just to return to the kind of bass end again. So, what kind of, like, you really have focused on this area a lot, more than almost anyone I can think of. So why? What draws you there?
It's a good question. I think it started with the fascination of music or sound being able to be something more than a pure oral, like ear-centric experience, or maybe a purely intellectual experience, and taking it to a different, realm of senses or whatever. So I don't think all my music with low frequency investigates that area. But that's where I started.
Right.
And then
So-
I
so
kind
kind
of got over that and wanted to try different things.
Yeah.
So just how, if I made that like a centre in my work, what kind of things would be revealed?
So it's a kind of a visceral thing. That's
It
what.
started that way, but I think that road has been well trod, not just by me, but by a lot of other people. But yeah, that's still part of it, I suppose, but not the central aspect. I guess even though the PhD was finished a while ago, I'm still exploring different ways to use low frequency, but it is definitely to do with the colour of low sounds in electronics or acoustic instruments. And I do think there's a different dimension in them than in other frequency areas.
And the the connection with Alvin Lucier, what is your kind of interest in this interaction between very pure frequencies and impure, human performances?
Well, I think that you just summed up what my interest is. It's that kind of strangely, the perception that electronic or sine tones specifically are pure. And the controllability of them, I suppose, that you can control a sine tone, you can shift the volume, the characteristic changes a little bit, but not radically, whereas with instruments there's all this range of nuance, and I guess I'm interested in comparing those things in lots of different ways. In terms of Alvin's work, I mean, I'm a big fan of his approach to electronics in particular, and the way he relates acoustic and electronic instruments throughout his career. But I'd also like to say that, throughout my own composing career, which is relatively short, I guess, in terms of notative music, I get kind of fascinations with different composers, and we've been talking about Decibel and the different, phases of interest of different composers. And, after a while working with a composer, I don't think you kind of, you work with the pieces, you get to know them quite intimately, and the approaches that you use towards them. And that kind of pops up in your work, sometimes a little bit later on. Lucier's one of those. I think Romatelli's come into my work, Chelsea definitely, and I think at the moment, just studying Eliane Redig's work, I think is having a big impact on the scale of my pieces as well as the detail in them.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Lindsay.